Okay, so we had a good start this morning, and we are going to the next first session of the day. It's a third session of our global summit, and it is net zero carbon reduction for wide format. Um, Today, it's a one-way direction from our companies and from all the market, everyone, our customers. And our printing industry, we have to be inside and we have to follow this direction. I would like to invite Claire Taylor, who is the owner of Claire Taylor Consulting, and she will be moderating this session together with Nathan Swinson Bullo and Christophe Osnak. The stage is yours. Thank
I'm here to do a bit of scene setting for you about why carbon reduction and net zero are particularly high on the agenda this year. The past year, as we all know, has been tumultuous for us all. Our lives have been completely overturned and many of us have lost loved ones. Our businesses have suffered, and with that, our ability to protect and to provide a future income for our staff and our families. That's just threatened now. Climate change has dropped out of the headlines to quite a degree, but this year we'll see a resurgence of interest and also new opportunities for change. Some of these changes have already happened, such as the numbers of people working from home and many companies deciding to continue with this, saving on the cost of office space. And this summit, which a year ago just would not have been possible in this way, but now it's online, live, demonstrating the flexibility of technology and of this industry. And no longer do we have to spend valuable time travelling far afield for meetings and conferences. All of this is saving energy and saving fuel. Starting now, there is hope for a brighter future ahead. So now is the time to look forward and see how we can start to rebuild. It's the time to take a fresh look at how we work and how we live, and to rebuild our lives and our businesses in a more sustainable way. It's a time to build resilience and a time to build back better. A phrase that's become a rallying cry across a broad spectrum of groups across the world, ranging from the Women's Institute to political and business leaders. The aim is to use the economic stimulus provided for the recovery and to build a greener and fairer future. Not just, for example, to move away from our reliance on fossil fuels, but also to create new, well-paid jobs in alternative, greener industries, so no one loses out. To ensure that all money spent to support business, industry, infrastructure and so forth in their recovery from the impacts of the pandemic is tied to improvements, to sustainability, to fairness. A green recovery could cut emissions in 2030 by as much as 25% compared to what they'd be if we carried on as we were. So far, very little of the stimulus has been green as yet, but this year we can expect to see it starting to become reality in many places as we gradually start to move from emergency mode to recovery mode, thanks to the rolling out of vaccines. There are many areas where business can lead, and smaller businesses really do count. They collectively employ the most people and collectively have the most impact. And to make it easier, the path forward has already been laid out by some of the big corporations. They've done the initial research, taken the first steps, and shown us what can be done, and with sound economic benefits. There are already leaders in our industry, and many more are setting out on that journey. So now is the time for the rest of the industry to step up to the challenge, or to be left behind. This session is specifically looking at net zero. For those unfamiliar with the term, it involves cutting our greenhouse gas emissions to the lowest possible, and only then offsetting or removing what we can't cut. That's to achieve a balance of zero, net zero. It's tough, but it's necessary, and a lot of businesses, public sector bodies, governments have signed up for it, and action's being taken by schools, universities, cities, and many other institutions across the globe. Climate change is already hurting everybody. Families, just like our own, are losing their homes, their businesses, and their lives from flooding, storms, and wildfires. Last year saw particularly bad fires in both the US and Australia, and the pace of this change is speeding up. Food resources are suffering, either directly from such events or more subtly. As the seasons change, so the insects and birds and plants that respond to the warming days in the spring find their timetable no longer matches those that respond to day length. Insects hatch before the flowers they need open. As they fail to thrive, birds lose their food source. Ultimately, we lose too. And of course, all this is exacerbating the problems caused by biodiversity loss. And even if you feel that a technical fix will be discovered to resolve this, why make the problem bigger? Reducing it would make a technical fix easier and thus more likely. We really, really need to reduce our carbon emissions, and quickly. We only have a few years before it becomes too late to prevent it running away with us. This is because greenhouse gases stay in the atmosphere for a long time, and they're building up. The earlier we cut emissions, the lower the increase in overall volume will be, and the less traumatic the changes in our lives will be, both those to achieve the reductions and those from the impacts, which can be slowed but not stopped. The sooner we take serious action, the lower the cost will be as well. And not taking action doesn't save money. It just means it'll be spent on disaster recovery and accommodating change, instead of preventing the need for this. Young people are pushing hard for action. They're the ones with most to lose. We're seeing a changed world. Our children and grandchildren will see a vastly changed world. COP26, the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference of the Parties, a world summit bringing together heads of state, climate experts, campaigners to agree coordinated action across the globe to tackle climate change, was scheduled to take place in Glasgow last year. It was postponed until November this year, but the youth COP still went ahead, and our youth have made their demands, and they're being heard. In a recent lawsuit, 33 European governments were ordered to respond to a complaint filed by 6 youth campaigners that governments are moving too slowly to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We can expect to see more, especially after a landmark case in the UK at the end of last year, in which an inquest listed air pollution as a direct cause of death of a young girl in Southwark. Young people are your future customers and staff. They will be looking to see who is taking up the challenge and will make their choices accordingly. This year, you can expect to see a lot of focus on climate change leading up to the delayed COP, and a lot of ambition from governments across the world. Last year, climate activism had to go online. This year, as lockdowns ease, expect to see it becoming much more visible as people take to the streets again, especially from youth movements such as Fridays for Future, the global movement inspired by Greta Thunberg. And the good news, now the US is planning to join the Paris Agreement, there is real hope of success. The changes needed are possible and affordable. For any of you unsure of what the Paris Agreement entails, it's to hold the increase in global average temperature to well below 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels, and to pursue efforts to limit to 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. In order to do this, the global net human-caused emissions of carbon dioxide must fall by at least 45% from 2010 levels by 2030, which is only 9 years away, and reach net zero by 2050. Non-CO2 emissions must also show deep reductions, and these are the gases such as methane and the refrigerants in air conditioning units. Joe Biden has indicated that he will join other nations and has already started the process in adopting a net zero goal by 2050, which would mean that the countries responsible for 63% of global emissions will have net zero plans. Many of the huge global corporations, and smaller ones too, are pushing hard for net zero in their own businesses and in their value chains, and using science-based targets based on the Paris Agreement to combat climate change. Not because they're environmental activists, but because they know their survival as successful businesses depends on making these changes. But they know they can't do it on their own. It needs collective action by everybody, by all businesses. So they're working with their supply chains to increase their reach. And those that support their aims are those that they want within that supply chain. Then there are the C40 cities. That's nearly 100 of the world's megacities, representing a quarter of the global economy. These cities' mayors have committed to delivering on the most ambitious goals of the Paris Agreement at the local level, and to work on cleaning up their air in their cities. Many smaller cities have followed suit. So how much of your work is for local government institutions? Expect to see green demands increase. The C40 have signed up to a green recovery, and many of them are also committed to moving towards zero waste, as considerable greenhouse gas savings can be made that way. Change is coming for those living and those running businesses in such cities. Universities and schools, from Harvard to small local primary schools, are declaring climate emergencies and taking climate action. Again, another customer base for many. In the United Kingdom, many national health trusts have done the same, as have health institutions elsewhere. Shareholders and financial institutions are pushing for change. They want to protect their investments. They don't wish to invest in businesses who are unprepared for change and who are unable to cope with climate impacts. There's also a divestment movement, moving investment away from fossil fuels to avoid a big hit as they lose value. So check where your pensions and your savings are invested. Governments are gradually waking up to the realisation that the commitments they've already made are not enough, and that nice words alone are not enough. They also have to act on them, and they have to ramp them up. As any business person knows, a fine mission statement is one thing, but what counts is a solid plan of action. Running up to the COP in Glasgow in November, new nationally determined contributions, known as NDCs, are required from the countries, giving their 2030 targets. Many have already come in, and many more are yet to come, leading up to November. This will set out their plans taking us to 2030. But investments by government must match the rhetoric, especially as it's business and industry who will be doing the heavy lifting. And this takes us back to the green recovery. The way that businesses are likely to be affected is going to vary from place to place. One thing we're likely to see more of is legislation. More requirements for energy reporting and energy auditing, similar to that already applies to larger businesses across Europe and elsewhere, but likely to move down the scale. These businesses have to carry out regular energy audits, and they have to identify ways of reducing their energy use. Another change may be added requirements for making reductions from what their findings are in these audits. There are also governance requirements, again for larger businesses at the moment, to disclose environmental impacts and climate-related financial risk. More taxes are likely, carbon taxes, fuel or transportation taxes, and bans and phase-outs. We already have dates for stopping selling petrol and diesel cars, and in the UK this has just been moved forward. This is a change that is unlikely to create any problems for users, as the technology is improving at an incredible rate. Costs are falling, range is increasing, charging point grids are rolling out, and there's already legislation around requiring charge points in certain parking areas, as well as rollouts along major roads. Wireless charging is getting better too, and high-speed charging, so it's all possible. And yes, making the electricity does still use fossil fuels at the moment, but that's diminishing too. In Europe, the share of renewables more than doubled from 2005, when it was 7.2%, to 2017, when it was 14.8%. And this increase is growing apace as new technology develops, with more efficient batteries, with better solar panels. The next big thing that's coming in the vehicles area is commercial vehicles with the right range and the right load capacity. A recent report from McKinsey reckons that take-up will be over 30% by 2030 across the range, from light vans to heavy vehicles. Regulation is lowering thresholds for CO2 emissions on new vehicles, and many cities and towns are introducing low emission or clean air zones, a move that improves air quality, but also continues the drive away from fossil fuel vehicles. And this will be one of the driving factors, especially for light vans used by many printers for their deliveries. Then, as you'll have gathered from my earlier comments, there will be market pressure for business to change. Businesses that accept the challenge will be well placed for the future. They will understand what they need to do, and they'll have started on the road to get there. They'll have targets along the way and be able to demonstrate to all their stakeholders, customers, bankers, lenders, staff, that they're realistic targets, that they know what action they need to take to achieve them, that they are taking that action and they are hitting those targets. They're protecting themselves where they can, with plans in case of floods or other climate catastrophes. They are geared up for success in our changing world. They won't be the ones who worry when major customers send them carbon reduction questionnaires, or are in regions that won't let diesel vehicles deliver, or their financial institutions ask difficult questions, or when they hear of new legislation coming in, because they'll be ready. They'll have the answers. They will be suppliers that businesses want to work with and that consumers trust. They are the future winners. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Claire, for your talking and so telling us so much about the actual situation on environmental global issues. Now I'm happy to introduce Christophe Osnack. Christophe, you don't need any presentation, everyone knows you, but just for the record, Christophe is the founder and owner of ATC Group in France, en France, and he's FESPA Vice President and FESPA France President. Christophe, the stage is yours.